Okay, so welcome to class two. We didn't finish our introduction last semester, last class. So we're going to try to finish our introduction. I'm just going to remind everyone that our timeline begins in 1654. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to explain the Jewish world in 1654 to understand the background of why it was there were Jews who came to what we call North America or to Manhattan Island in 1654. Again, our timeline, unfortunately, is still, I'm just going to double check, it's still offline. Unless they updated it, but I don't think they did. Let's see. Either way, I have the archive of it. There we go. So let's remember that in 1654, right, our timeline begins. 23 Jewish refugees flee Brazil and the long arm of the Inquisition and land in New Amsterdam. So what we're going to try to do, maybe in the next half hour, is try to explain this sentence. So I don't know where we left off, but we left off that there was something called, let's go back just to 1492. 1391 and 1492, Spain had exiled all their Jews. They had given the Jews a chance or choice to convert, which many did. Then 5 years later, the King of Portugal, now again, European history and is very complicated, but in a nutshell, Portugal used to be nice and happy for their Jewish residents. Not only that, they welcomed in 1492, they were filled to take in thousands and thousands of Jews fleeing Spain, took it to Portugal. That's just for those who know your how well you know your maps of Europe. I have here a city called Braganza. I'll get back to that in a second. But Portugal is on the left of the western side of Spain. So here's all of Spain. Again, this was united under Ferdinand and Isabel in 1492, and this is Portugal. To make a very long story short, I have just highlighted here the city of Braganza. I'll talk about it in a second. But Portugal welcomed all the Jews, a lot of Jews, and then the king, a few years later, 5 years later, had a change of heart. He had a change of heart because he wanted to solidify his power, and the only way to do that was to marry the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, and the condition of marriage was to expel the Jews, whether it was his in-laws or his bride. So he had to choose between the Jews that he wanted or liked to have in his kingdom and his wife and his in-laws. And he chose both. Now, technically, he chose his wife and his in-laws, which means he officially kicked out all the Jews. But he had a better idea. He had a better idea that he just basically converted the Jews even against their will, as opposed to in Spain, where tens of thousands willingly to stay converted to become Christians. In Portugal, a lot of them, it was wink, wink, nod, nod, sprinkle, sprinkle. You're a Christian, but I'm not going to bother you. Just do whatever you got to do, but just pretend, because I got to get married to your daughter. And this is what happened. So Portugal had a very, very strong Jewish underground, and that's what I was showing you. The town of Braganza, which is right here. You can see it's really the border between Spain and Portugal. It's really the northeast corner of Portugal, which is right next to Spain, as you can see here. Braganza was one of those towns that, sharing it, right? It's right there. There's Braganza. I'm bringing it up because it's relevant. I mean, we're not going into all the history, but it's a good name of a city to know. And it hosted thousands of Jewish people, and it was wink, wink, nod, nod. Act like Christians, but do whatever you got to do. And for the next hundreds of years, and this is really where our story picks up, there are these people living in Spain and Portugal known as Marranos or Anusim or New Christians, who are living fake lives, secret lives. Outwardly, they are Christians, but secretly, they practice Judaism. Now, Obviously, what type of Judaism they practice is hard to understand. They can't do that much, but there's maybe certain dietary laws of kosher. Maybe they can't circumcise because obviously that's just asking to be killed. Because the minute anyone ever sees a man not dressed, they know he's Jewish. So they're not circumcising. They're trying to keep Shabbat, Shabbos in some way. Yom Kippur, Pesach, whatever they can do. This is going on for the whole 1500s. And what happens is the church is nervous and very, very afraid of this. And they set up this office called the Office of Inquisition, which this is what we ended off with. The Office of Inquisition's job was to weed out these new Christians. The Office of Inquisition's job is to, hey Eric, was to
Morning.
Or afternoon, was to weed out these new Christians and find them and kill them and then torture them beforehand to find out who their friends are, because again, these were secret communities and they kept amongst themselves. Obviously, they prayed together and they married each other. So you're talking about from 1490s till we'll see till the 1700s. In Portugal, there remained this group of Moranos, Anusim, New Christians, whatever words you want to use, conversos, and they were ostensibly outwardly Christian, but again, secretly they were Jews. So why is this important? Okay, so let's just go. What happens? Sometime in the so again, you all know America was discovered, et cetera, et cetera. Sometime in the 1500s and early 1600s, a bunch of Moranos, whatever word you want to use, made their way to Amsterdam, made their way to the Netherlands. And when they got there, they said, you know what? Joke's on everyone else. We have been secretly Jews. Now, the only reason that this worked was, again, it's to understand the history, but let me see a quick video about this.
Hello, wonderful people. This is Portugal, the 80 Years' War. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, there should be an annotation on screen right now and a link in the description. Anyway, I'll be continuing at the end of part 1. The year 1629 began the incline of the 80 Years' War. The Spanish force, slowly running out of resources, began slowly retreating from the Netherlands and giving many cities that they had previously captured back, such as Breda and Utrecht. Seizing the opportunity, the Netherlands launched an assault, speeding the Spanish retreat. Around that time, Swedish King and General Gustavus II Adolphus landed in Germany after finishing the Swedish-Polish War. From then on, King Gustavus began a sort of invasion of Germany. This led to the Battle of Lutzen, which was fought with more than 20,000 infantry, over 15,000 cavalry, and nearly 90 guns. The battle ended with the defeat of the Roman Empire and the Catholic League, but at the cost of King Gustavus' life. The Battle of Lutzen, in a way, launched the decline of the 80 Years' War. By 1640, the Netherlands managed to capture all of their previous city from the Spanish Empire, and in the same year, Portugal gained independence from the Spanish Empire.
Okay, so as you saw, the year 1640 was a very important one. Again, everyone was fighting with everyone in Europe. We're not here for European history, but if it's called the 80 Years' War, that it tells you how long the war was. But what's important for us to know, let's go back to our map for a second, that in the 80 years, at the end in the 1620s and 30s and 40s, this area here, what we call the Netherlands, which was previously controlled by Spain, and therefore was under the Inquisition, was under Roman Catholic rule. All of that ended, and the Netherlands, by kicking out Spain, it became independent. All of a sudden became not only independent as a country, but also became what we would call the first tolerant nation. But again, everyone who had lived there again, it was under Spanish control till then. So that was interesting. And therefore, once it sort of became independent, hundreds and thousands of former Moranos from Portugal and Spain went there and said, haha, I'm really, really Jewish. There's a famous person. I opened, if you look at the module, today's module, let's see if I can find today's module open. If you look at today's, okay, I already opened the module for you. One of the person name is Orobio de Castro. I think I have it open here. Let me see if I have it open here. So, let's see if I have it open. I have a lot of stuff. Maybe not. No. Orobio de Castro. I have it. Give me 1 second. Right. So here you have, this is a book. It's a very nice book. It's really able to read it. And it tells us the story of a man, Baltazar Orobio, a physician, right? He in Seville was considered of being he was convicted of being a Jew. Again, this is just a random story, but it's a story of a Marrano. It's a story of these Jews who left Portugal and Spain in the 1600s and went to Amsterdam to declare their being Jewish, and they established a Jewish community there. Yeah, so it turns that why is it relevant? So in the Netherlands, all of a sudden there are Dutch Jews. These Dutch Jews, again, are Spanish Portuguese in descent who have come back to Judaism. Now there are many famous rabbis. Now we just need to take a slight break and talk about something very important that's also relevant, and that is the false messiah named Sabbatai Tzvi, or Shabtai Tzvi. I don't know how many of you heard of him. The false messiah, Shabtai Tzvi. Anyone?
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Okay. What do you know about him?
He basically whatever he was the false messiah. I don't know. They were. I
Okay.
remember they mentioned it in my school, but I don't remember exactly. But I remember the false Mashiach. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things.
He was a big scholar, no?
Well,
very
you know that's part of the question. What he was. He was a very, very interesting and convincing man. That there's no question. What happens is, and again, we're not going through. We don't have time to do that all of that history. Shabtai Tzvi in the 1600s, after everything, tries to convince the world that he's the Messiah, and he's going to gather in all the exiles. And again, for the Spanish, Portuguese Jews, especially, and the ones in the Netherlands, this is a sign. After all of the troubles of they went through, and in Europe, there was a very bad period called 1648 and 1649. In Hebrew, we call it Tach V'Tat, which is the Hebrew dates of that year, 1648 and 1649. It was like, again, because we live after the Holocaust, everything sort of pales in comparison. But the year 1648 and 1649 was this total destruction of basically all the Jewish areas in Poland and Ukraine. There was a man, Bogdan Khmelnytsky. Khmelnytsky was a Ukrainian hero, but he rallied. He basically brought the Ukrainians together, and he's still on their money. That being said, he was his people the Cossacks were devastating to the Jews. And in 1648, 1649, thousands and hundreds of thousands of Jews and their communities were totally wiped out. So the Jewish people, imagine after the Holocaust, were totally depressed and were totally, they looked very bleak, Judaism. Came along a man named Shabtai Tzvi, and he said, I'm the Messiah, and I'm going to redeem all the Jews. And everyone sort of believed him. Now, in Amsterdam, there was a lot of people who believed him. And one of them was one of the main rabbis, and he's a very interesting rabbi. It's good to know, but just to learn about his name a little bit. I just want to show you. First of all, I want to show you. This is a book, a nice book called The Sabbatean Prophets. I'm not on my screen sharing. Here's this book. It's called The Sabbatean Prophets. I'll show you the front cover. This is the cover of the book. Ateres Tzvi, right? Because his name was Tzvi, and Tzvi is Mashiach, and Shabsai Tzvi. This is the image of him sitting, right? And this is the people, and this is the book, great book by Matt Goldish. And he had prophets. Shabsai Tzvi had lots of people who believed. And one of his famous prophet was Nathan of Gaza, Nasan HaZasi, we call it we say it in Hebrew. And I just want to get to one of the people. I should have it open. There were a few people. One was, come on, I gotta have it somewhere. Seriously? Yeah. I opened everything ahead of time, and now I still can't find it. Okay, not good. No. Give me 1 second, because this should be easy for me to find. Let's see if this. No. Okay. Out of memory. What that means. Okay, that's not what I wanted. In 1 more second. Okay. Give me, I don't know why I can't find it. I want to show you the picture. Otherwise, a picture's worth always 1,000 words, obviously, but I can't find it. I'm going to take 1 more second. I'm really sorry. Let's see if this is it. Okay. Let me just, I think I have to start over again because something's wrong with my Adobe Acrobat. So you'll give me 2 seconds and then we'll go from there. Do apologize. And I'm sharing my screen the whole time when I'm doing it, which is not fun either. Let's do it a different way. Let's do it a different way. This man, Isaac Avoav da Fonseca, was if you can see it here, here's one of his, this is a song or a piyut or a religious song that he composed, and this is how they sing it.
בפישיו שלחתי לארץ מרחקים, בדברי נביאו בהקים.
So I want to introduce you because Isaac Aboav de Fonseca was actually one of the first rabbis in the New World. He was the rabbi in Recife. Why was he the rabbi in Recife? So we're almost ready to begin. So if we go back to our map, remember at our timeline, so Recife was here. Recife is a city at the end, the eastern end of Brazil, and it was a Dutch colony. Like many of the colonies of, I'm sorry, many of the colonies of the Caribbean were Dutch. Suriname, for example, right? You know, and a lot of these places were conquered. If you go in here, right? A lot of the Dutch were a colonizing nation, and therefore, at one point, the Dutch were the colonizers of Recife. So much so that, and this is the important point, the Jews went along with the settlers, the European settlers, and there was a Jewish community in Recife. Now, I just not going off topic, but there were many places in America. Again, before we get to North America, what we call the United States of America, there were many places that were settled by. In this time. Here, I'll just go quickly. Let's close this a second. No, I want to. Sorry. To a second. So, for example, here are this is called the Netherlands Israelitish Synagogue. These are the synagogues of South America or Central America, which were originally Dutch colonies. And in those areas, there were Jewish settlers who went along with the Dutch settlers. This is a famous synagogue that had sand as their floor. As you can see, the synagogue is built. It's very built in the Sephardic or the Spanish Portuguese tradition. You had a balcony.
You're not sharing your screen.
I am not sharing my screen. Thank you for pointing it out. So here we go. Here we go. The synagogue in Suriname, and this is what it looks like. Again, here's the inside. That's the ark, and there's a center stage where the reader would stand on top of. And it's built in the Spanish Portuguese tradition. We have other synagogues of the Caribbean. Someone went around and taking all the videos, March 2018. Again, these are the new ones. We want the new ones. We want the old ones. There's another one called the Mikveh Israel Synagogue. Here, we're just. I have the sound off, but you could see. And these are all built by the settlers in the early 1600s when the Jewish settlers went together with the Dutch colonizers. Okay, so I want to go. We have a lot to do, so I'm sort of going to skip ahead for a second. Hope you don't mind. So what happens was in 1650. Let's just skip ahead. I don't want to skip ahead. Yeah, let's skip ahead. In 1654. Remember, here is what we're doing. 1654. 23 Jews flee Brazil in the long arm of the Inquisition. In 1654, this area, in 1653, this was controlled by the Dutch. In 1654, the Portuguese conquered Brazil and won it from the Dutch. That is why today the language of Brazil is Portuguese. And now they kicked out the Dutch. Now they had a choice. Everyone had a choice, the Dutch and the Portuguese. And for whatever reason, maybe the Dutch insisted, the Dutch made a rule and they allowed the Jews to leave. Why wouldn't the Jews stay? Well, the Jews wouldn't stay, obviously, because when the Portuguese came, they brought the Inquisition with them. And if the Jews would stay, especially most of the Jews there, again, were children or maybe themselves or grandchildren of Moranos who said, we're Jewish. And now the Portuguese said, we're back. So the Jews had no choice but to flee. Again, don't forget, anywhere that the Spanish and the Portuguese controlled, even in North America or in South America, they brought the Inquisition with them. And you were not allowed, not only were you not allowed to be not Christian, but you were not, the worst thing was for the Jews who had pretended and then especially went back and proved that they were never really serious Christians. So 23 refugees. Now, really, it was 16 boats that left. Many, many boats left. Where did all the boats go? Well, most of the boats followed the coast and went back to the home country, which they were from, of the Netherlands. No problem. Or maybe they went to Suriname, irrelevant. One boat of 23 people, for whatever reason, whether it was pirates or whether it was a hurricane, it's sort of irrelevant, ended up on another Dutch colony. And that's the important point. Again, they were Dutch citizens who were living in a Dutch colony. They lost the war to Portugal. The Portuguese let them leave instead of just killing them or inquisitioning them. And these 23 Jews on a boat headed back towards the Netherlands, for whatever reason, had to stop here at New Netherlands. The southern tip of New York in 1654, just this little piece right here. This piece right here from, imagine you're looking at the bridge here. This little tip of Manhattan Island was called New Amsterdam. Here is a better picture of it, the way it looked in 1660. It was a lot smaller. We added a lot of landfill around. I don't know if you can see, but these were the streets that line up with the streets today. This was again, we've added a lot of dirt to make the island wider, but this was the size of Manhattan Island, what was then called New Amsterdam. And here was the edge of the city, right here on Wall Street. You want to know why Wall Street is named Wall Street? Very simple, because there was a wall there. It was the end of the city. So, and you know why Water Street was called Water Street? Anyone have a guess?
Canal?
Because there was water there. Because there was like a little channel coming in from the river. So, in 1654, 23 Jews end up at New Amsterdam. They have no money. They have no relatives. There are no Jews here. But they said, listen, we're also Dutch citizens, sort of, but we didn't really want to be in New Amsterdam, but our boat fell apart, or we owed money to the ship captain, or there were pirates. It's not really relevant. And they showed up and they came and they said, we're here. And here's where our story begins. So 1654. Now, remember I told you last time that one of the books that we'll be using is our source book. I already have it for you, so I'm going to open it up. But again, our source book means it's our primary source reader. And we're going to read this together. Again, don't forget, primary source reader means that we're looking at actual historical documents. So our first source 1.01. Oh, here's another picture of him, Rabbi Isaac Avov de Fonseca. As I said, he was the rabbi in Recife for a little bit. He didn't come to America when the Portuguese came. He went back to he went back to the Amsterdam. The reason I mentioned him, it's a very interesting story. He was, again, he looks like a very religious rabbi, as you can see. He was at one point he believed, and again, it's not nice to say this, but he believed in the messiahness of Shabtai Tzvi. Again, which was very common. I would say 2/3 of the rabbis and the Jews of the world believed that Shabtai Tzvi was Messiah. We'll get back to that, why that's important in a second. But interesting, important rabbi, that's his picture. Here's an actual picture of what Recife looked like. Okay. Here we go. September 22nd, 1654. So we're today September 7th, 2022. So roughly 350 years ago. The governor, named Peter Stuyvesant, who was in charge of this island, writes a letter. And what's his letter? Let's read his letter. Again, the italicized words are the words of the editors of the book. The words in regular print are the actual words that Peter Stuyvesant, the actual historical documents. The Jews who have arrived here would nearly all like to remain here. But learning that they, with their customary usury and deceitful trading with the Christians. Okay, so he says, why don't we like Jews? Two reasons. They're deceitful when they trade with the Christians, and they're usury. Does anybody know what the word usury means? Anybody? Usury? It's a fancy English word. But usury is the term for high interest. Like when you have a credit card and you pay 21% interest on your credit card loan.
Interest
Sorry?
payments? Oh,
Yeah.
You said credit card, yeah.
Yeah, interest payments. So usury is a fancy word for interest payments. It usually refers to high interest. Like 2-3%, you wouldn't call usury, but it technically can mean that. In the Bible, in the Torah, Old Testament, whatever word you want to use, the Bible forbids interest, usury. If I lend you $100, you only have to give back 100. I'm not allowed to charge you $110. So economies have a very hard time with this rule, especially kings and all that. One of the ways around the rule, both for Christians and Jews, is that Jews may not charge interest to their fellow Jew, and Christians may not charge interest to their fellow Christian. However, a Jew can charge interest to a Christian and vice versa. So throughout Europe, the Jew is the money lender for many reasons. It's a vicious cycle. Because of anti-Semitism, Jews were not allowed to practice certain trades, they weren't allowed to have certain jobs. So one of the only jobs they could have was being the banker and being the guy who lent money. But no one likes to pay interest. And no one likes to pay back credit card debt or interest loans. So because they hated the Jews, they forced them to be money lenders, which made the Jew even more hated. So Peter Stuyvesant says here, the Jews, with their customary usury and deceitful trading, were repugnant. They hated to the people who lived there, meaning to the judges here, and also to the people. So the leaders of the community and the people, no one likes the Jews. Additionally, the deaconry, meaning the church, which takes care of the poor, also fearing that owing to their present indigence, meaning they were, due to the fact they had been captured and robbed by privateers or pirates, meaning the Jews who came here were very poor. And so again, it's September. What can you plant in September? No. Whatever you grew in the summer, you have. Once winter hits in New Amsterdam in 1654, 1655, whatever limited food they have, that's all they had for the next 6 months, 8 months until the food grows again. So there's very little food here for the benefit and the weak and newly developing places. Don't forget, this is a new idea, the settling of the new country. We deemed it useful, I'm reading over here, to require them in a friendly way to depart. I, Peter Stuyvesant, am writing to you, my bosses, the owners of New Amsterdam, telling you that we don't want the Jews to stay, and nicely and calmly will say, please get out of here. Right? Let me just finish the source. For ourselves and for the general community of worship, that the deceitful race, the Jews, hateful enemies and blasphemers of the name of Christ. So again, they charge too much interest, they don't deal properly, they're poor, we don't have any money for them, and they hate our religion and they hate Christ. We don't be not allowed to further to infect and trouble this new colony. I, Peter Stuyvesant, am writing to my bosses in September 22nd, 1654, asking permission to kick the Jews out. They might be Dutch citizens, and I might feel bad for them, but we don't want them here for the reasons I just said. Yes, go ahead.
The 23 Jews who fled Brazil, this is where they came to?
Yes, the boat ended up on this Dutch colony. Don't forget, so they didn't go to any other colonies. They went to a Dutch colony called New Amsterdam, and they said, listen, our boat's not working. We have no more money to pay the captain. Whatever the circumstances are, they ended up here and they asked permission to stay in this Dutch colony.
But they were tolerated in Brazil, right? And which was also a Dutch colony.
Yes, in Brazil, the Dutch colony, which was rich, and they had jobs there, and they, it was part of the Dutch allowed them. And you'll see the answer here. But Peter Stuyvesant, for whatever reason, was not a happy camper and did not want them. He gave 3 basic reasons. We can't feed them because they're poor and we have very little money. They hate Christ and we're Christians, and we don't like the way they do business and charge interest. Those 3 reasons.
I got it. Okay, thank you.
So the question I have for you, class, is Peter Stuyvesant a good person? Okay, so right, anyone can say whatever they want. Welcome. Was he right or was he wrong?
He was his perception was based off of information he was familiar with. That's how he saw the world.
Right. He saw the world. Jews were hated by most Christians, or some of them tolerated, but there were still people apart. A lot of people had anti-Semitic views in them because of the way they did business, like I just explained. And it was true that they had very little food. That part is very true. And he gets a new colony, which will in a few years they'll lose to England. We'll talk about that in a second. So my question to you is, and this is like an assignment that we should all, I think, do now. I think this should be like a do now assignment. What do you think of that idea? A do now assignment. Let me see if I can find it. If you all have, let's see. Hold on, I'm going to open it up to you. And so, are you all aware? Hold on, let me open Zoom. Are you all aware how discussions work in Zoom?
Professor, you're muted.
I've been muted for okay. So I've been muted for a while. That's pretty cool. Okay. What do you think the answer that he got was? What was the answer that Peter Stuyvesant's boss told him? Again, he asked his boss, he had the right to say no to the Jews. What was the answer? Now, I'm sure you know the answer because we're having this class. If the class says, okay, the Jews came in 1654, obviously the answer is that they were allowed to stay. Why do you think they were allowed to stay? So let's read the historical documents. Here we go. Okay, so remember we read source 103. Now let's read source 104. Source 104 is not the answer yet. Source 104 is the Amsterdam's Jewish community in January of 1655, writing a letter to the heads of the company. Don't forget, so it was called the West India Company. The merchants of the Portuguese nation. That's what they called themselves. They were living in Amsterdam, but they called themselves the Portuguese nation, residing in Amsterdam. They asked to allow the Portuguese Jews, that's what they called them, to travel and live there. There are many of the nation who have lost their possession in Pernambuco, which is the overall place of Recife. They lost their money when we right. And I'm just going to skip through this. It is well known to your honors that the Jewish nation in Brazil have at all times been faithful and have striven to guard and maintain that place, risking for that purpose their possessions and their blood. So the point of the Jewish community of Amsterdam is Jews in Recife are good citizens. Everything that Peter Stuyvesant said is not right. The Jews are good citizens. Not only that, you yourselves and here in the Netherlands have always protected the Jewish people. That was the condition of the peace with the King of Spain in 1648. Your honor should also please consider that many of the Jewish nation are principal shareholders in the company. Who owned New Amsterdam and New Netherlands? The Dutch West Indies Company. Well, the Dutch West Indies Company was a company like Google or Apple or GM. And who owned stock in the company? Who were the investors in the Dutch West Indies Company? Many Jewish people. So the people say, well, so if you think about it, Peter Stuyvesant was writing to the directors of the company, but some of the owners, some of the investors of the companies were Jewish. Therefore, the petitioner's request for the reasons given above, your honor would be pleased not to exclude the Great Jewish Nation passage. So here's the answer. Extract from reply by the Amsterdam Chamber of the West Indies Company to Stuyvesant's letter, April 26, 1655. So it's a very funny thing because he didn't want them there for the winter, but by the time, there was no email and there was no telephone. So he sent the letter in September. He only got an answer back in April, and they were there anyway for the winter. And they write to him, honorable, prudent, pious, dear, faithful Stuyvesant, we would have liked to fulfill your wishes and requests that the new territory should no more be allowed to be infected by people of the Jewish nation. For we see therefore the same difficulties which you fear. But after having further weighed and considered the matter, we observe this to be somewhat unreasonable and unfair because of the loss they sustained in taking of Brazil and because of the large amount of capital which they have invested in the shares of the company. Therefore, after many deliberations, we have finally decided to resolve upon a petition that Jews can trade, provided the poor among them shall not become a burden to the company or the community, but be supported by their own nation. You will now govern yourself accordingly. So what answer did they give? What was the answer? Very interesting answer. We hear what you're saying, Mr. Stuyvesant, but listen, they suffered in Brazil, and it's not, and they're sort of owners of this company, so you can't really get rid of them. But you are right, and you shouldn't have to support them, and therefore you can tell them that the Jewish people, wherever throughout the world, should support them, but they have to be allowed to stay. And that's how it ends. So that is where that story ends, and our story begins. Our story begins that 23 Jews in 1654 and made their way, for whatever reason, to New Amsterdam, and they were allowed to stay after almost after 7 to 8 months of letter writing and waiting for a decision. And the first Jews in America were these 23 Jews. Now, just for the fun of it, there are people who claim that there is another person who was first. If you go to the east side of Manhattan, there is a recreation center and pool called the Asser Levy Pool and Recreation Center. It's right here between 23rd Street and 25th Street. It's called Asser, is from Asher or Asher, and you can still see it today if you go outside. It was, let's see if you can, it was a free public bath. At some point they built, now it's a pool, but at some point there was very bad hygiene, and it's called the Asher or Asser Levy Recreation Center and Pool. It is in. That's the pool. It's an old building. I used to be able to zoom in. Can't zoom in. So, if you can read, it says free public baths. Is there another picture of the outside? I guess not. Okay, old building, fine. Maybe this is a picture. Yeah, either way, if you want to go see it, it's a nice old building. And why is it called Asher Levy? So Asher Levy was either the first, and he came actually before these 23 Jews, or he was the second, maybe 24, whatever. But just that's it. I want to point out that there is another person who is a claim that he was first. He did not have any great story. He just was a merchant who came to America or the Netherlands, tried to make some money, and he lived in Manhattan Island as well. Okay, so it is 1:30, and we have now we're ready to begin the semester. I know it sounds funny.